Hi there everyone, I'm Luke and I'm here under those Pesky very kind invitation for me to do a guest video for their channel. A little bit of relevant background to what I'm going to talk about today. I am a trans boy. That means that my gender identity is different to that usually associated with the sex that I was assigned at birth. And also I have recently come out as trans, which means that I have presented and lived as a woman for about 22 years. Today I'm going to talk a little bit about male privilege, about being trans, and about being seen as a cis person by the rest of society. As I said before, I recently came out as trans, and consequently I recently also started presenting myself as male to society. And before starting this process, I figured that in a while, once I started hormone therapy, or eventually if maybe I got surgery, I would start being perceived as male by society overall, and I would somehow experience male privilege in a way that I could never conceptualize experiencing before. However, I thought this was a long way off, because I figured that there was no way for me to experience male privilege while I wasn't at least on hormone therapy, or while society couldn't read me as male. So I wasn't quite fully aware of it when male privilege completely sneaked up on me. I don't know if it was my attitude, or if it was my haircut, or if it was just the clothes I was wearing, but suddenly I found myself passing about 90% of the time while I was out on the street. So this has led me to acquiring a big amount of male privileges. For me, to finding myself in situations in which before, while being perceived as a woman, I was treated in a certain way, and now, being perceived as a man, I am treated in a completely different way. And the difference, sometimes it's so big, it's scary and completely horrifying, and just makes me want to blow society up. I feel a greater sense of respect when I'm in any sort of customer situation, in the sense that, like, the cab driver will specifically ask me what routes I want to take, as if I'm supposed to know as much about traffic and cars as he is. This almost never happened when I was being read as female. These are things I started realizing early on, but they're not, I wouldn't say minor, but they're not as blatantly sexist as what started to happen last week. So last week was Carnival. I don't know if you heard about it. It's this big party in Rio de Janeiro where I live. It's basically 5 days of people getting ridiculously drunk on the streets, partying all the time, and dancing to samba. Incidentally, Carnival also includes a lot of sexual harassment, and it includes, unfortunately, an environment where rape is quite common, actually. It's a situation where men are supposed to feel like all the women on the street who are drunk are theirs for the taking. Last Saturday, I was leaving the movie theater around 9 p.m., which wasn't even that late, and because the transportation system in the city is completely non-functional during Carnival, I decided to walk home. When I got to the beach, the climate is a complete uproar. There are beer cans everywhere, there are drunken people everywhere, there is a little bit of loud music, and there are quite a few cops, and yet, as I look around, there is sexual harassment happening in every single corner of that beach. I was walking around, and I was walking parallel to these two girls who were by themselves, and the men kept pulling their hair and trying to kiss them, trying to get closer to them, to give them like this peck on the cheek or whatever, as if that was nothing. And the cops just kept standing on the corners and looking on as if nothing was happening. And I'm scared shitless at this point, because I'm thinking, oh my god, I want to do something about this, and I don't know what to do, because I'm afraid people are going to call me a fag and beat me up. And I was also scared of instantly losing the male privilege that I was having at that point, because I was so scared they were going to realize that I wasn't cis, that I was trans, and that in their head was going to equate to me being a woman, and I honestly was just really scared of being raped and beaten at that point. I kept moving on, I put my head down, and I passed right in the middle. There was nowhere to go, so I had to pass right in the middle of these groups of all these very drunk men, and shirtless pajamas and still trying to hit on all the other girls who were on the beach. And I kept passing right in the middle of them. And nothing happened to me. Nothing. They didn't even look at me twice. It was as if, because I was a member of their group, that they had no reason to harass me. In that situation, I was completely frozen. I probably should have said something. I should have, you know, called them out, but it was really scary, as I said before. But I think that it's really important that we start having an issue, we start having a conversation. We people from privileged groups, and in my case, now that I'm entering this privileged group of being a man, which it's almost like the ultimate privilege in this society, how can we, as part of privileged groups, fight oppression? Obviously, one of the ways of doing that is speaking out about it, but obviously one of the ways of doing that as well is giving voice to those who don't have them. It's by not pretending that we know other people's experiences with oppression, but it's about listening to them and trying to understand what is the best way to help people out and to try to change society for the better, to try to make society a place where there is no privilege, where quite frankly everybody's treated the same way, which is just ridiculous utopia, but there you have it. It's quite upsetting to me that sometimes I'll see people in the trans masculine community who do not realize that they have male privilege. Obviously, as a trans person, we do not have cis privilege, but we may have the privilege of being perceived as cis. Most importantly, as a trans person, if we are perceived as male, we do have male privilege in society. It's a very weird experience. Having been perceived as female and still being perceived as female sometimes, and now being perceived as male, and to see this shift, this very clear shift in these very clear forms of sexism that used to be directed at me and that now no longer are. Maybe in a way this makes it easier for me as a trans person to identify male privilege because, you know, I never had it before and now suddenly I do. But at the same time, I think that it's important for us to acknowledge that trans masculine people may and probably will experience male privilege during their lives. We tend to think that just because we don't experience cis privilege, just because we are oppressed as trans people, that we're not going to experience other forms of privilege, especially not ones that are linked to gender, but this is very real. So let's non-rhetorically ask ourselves, what can we, as trans people who experience male privilege, do to start changing the sexist way in which society operates? The first step, I think, is acknowledging that we have male privilege and that it's real and that it's everywhere, and it's even in the very small things like the way the cab driver talks to me, and it's also in the very big things like the way that we are not, we may not be targets of sexual harassment as often as we were when we presented as women. Obviously, I have to say I speak from my own experience. I do not mean to represent any other trans masculine individual or obviously any other trans person in the feminine side of the spectrum, or to know what their experiences are like. Hopefully this wasn't too long and it wasn't too rambly and it made some sort of sense. I would love to keep being part of the discussion on how we experience privilege and oppression and what can we do to start changing things in the comments. And my personal channel, I will also put it on the bottom. You can always find me there. Thanks for the names for this spot again, and I hope that my weirdly non-British accent was not too hard on your ears. I know that English is not my first language. I probably made like a million mistakes, but I hope you have that you can bear with me. All right. Thank you again. Bye.